Sermon of the week. Temple. Well, what do you think, Hag? I don't know. Maybe he wants some information, or maybe he wants to lock you up, Zek said. For what? I haven't done anything. I'm just a law-abiding citizen in this god-forsaken city. Look out there, shacks and people living on the streets. What is this holy city come to? Hag said as he spit a wad of mucus into a spittoon sitting next to his chair. I don't know. I was up to see the priest Joshua the other day. Shabbat? Yeah, well, I went to the second service, then I waited to talk to him, Zach said. Well, what words of wisdom did he have? Hag said. Oh, not much. Just talked about how things will get better. Says someday, when God wills it, a more permanent temple will be built, but until then he is content to care for his flock as is. He says no matter what, being in Jerusalem is far better than being in Nineveh or points farther east. Zach took a long sip of tea and then used Hag's spittoon for his own deposit. You know, how long have we been back from Persia? Hag asked. Well, we headed back in 39. It's now 20. That'd be 19 years, Zach replied. Yeah, 19 years and just an altar and some wooden chairs and over it all a canvas tent. You think for 1 minute that our God approves? Zach raised his eyebrows. I don't know. Why don't you ask him? Ha ha! God doesn't listen to me or any other Hebrew anymore. We all deserted him for centuries. Finally, he had enough of the evil and corruption. He marched us off to something a little closer to civilization. I don't know about that, Zach said. I do. At least they aren't sacrificing their children to some fictitious god like Baal. I don't know about that. I think we were teaching those Persians how to do just that, Zach said. Well, it's tragedy. 19 years here and we have to go worship in a tent. It even leaks when it rains, Hag said. Can't we get somebody to resume building it? Those Samaritans stonewalled the whole thing. Those unions still around? Zach asked. I think so. Don't hear much, but as soon as someone gets the idea to build again, they'll pop back up, Hag said. Well, buddy, why don't you ask him? Me? I would be just wasting my breath. God doesn't hear us anymore, Hag said, staring out the window at the setting sun. Then pointed, That's what we are, Israel, sailing into oblivion. Zach nodded his head. Well, I gotta go. The little woman said to be home by 6 for supper. Smoked fish. Hag stood and helped his friend up. Thanks for coming by. Enjoy your fish. I got some bread and cheese here somewhere, Hag said. Why don't you come over and eat with us? I'm sure there'll be plenty, Zach offered. I got some other things to take care of this evening, Hag said. Well, okay. And why don't you try it? Zach asked. Ask him. I'll see, Hag said, saluting his friend. Temple is an interesting word. It has an interesting meaning. It is defined as a building devoted to the worship or regarded as the dwelling place of a god or gods. The word temple is used in the Bible 191 times. But can anyone guess when it was first used? It's not used in Genesis, not in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. The first instance of its use is in the book of Judges. But its use has nothing to do with a building or a place of worship. And I quote, Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent and took a hammer in her hand and went softly unto him and smote the nail into his temples and fastened it to the ground, where he was fast asleep and weary, so he died. The first use of the word temple in the Bible is associated with a murder or homicide, as the police say. Who would have thought? Why did God wait so long to even use the word temple in his book that his children were to use as a guidebook? In fact, the first use of the word temple is defined as a place of worship is 2 more books later in 1 Samuel 1:9, the 9th book of the Bible. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord. Well, what is the second definition of the word temple? It is in fact a part of our human anatomy. The temple is the junction of 4 skull bones in our head, the frontal, parietal, temporal, and sphenoid. It is located at a spot between our foreheads and our ears, and the superficial temporal artery crosses it. Inflammation of this tiny artery can lead to temporal arteritis, a very painful condition. The temporal muscle covers the area and assists in chewing. Where did this area get its name from? The word temple comes from the Latin word tempus, meaning time. As this area is often the first area where the hair turns gray, it was called the temple. Incidentally, the exact point of junction between the four skull bones listed above is called the pterion, and is the weakest point of the human skull, a fact our murderous Jael must have known. Why would God wait almost 3,000 years of biblical history before referring to his temple, the place where he abides, and we are to worship him? 3,000 years is about half of the history of humanity living on our world. Why did he wait until Samuel's day to talk about his temple? Well, actually he didn't. We must move back about 300 years to the exodus of Israel from Egypt. In Exodus 25:9, God uses another word, tabernacle, to describe a place of worship to be used by Israel, where God would abide. But still, Israel's exodus from Egypt occurred around 1400 BC, give or take 100 years. So it was not until Israel left Egypt that a temple was built. But why would God wait 2,500 years from his creation to set up his first temple? In Eden, there is no mention of such a place. God took 6 days to create the earth and rested on the seventh, but no mention of worship is made regarding Adam and Eve. In Genesis 4, Cain and Abel brought offerings to the Lord, but no mention of a temple is given. Did man not need to worship God then? Most assuredly Cain and Abel did, as did two other brothers, Jacob and Esau. But the first mention of a temple is when Israel marched out of Egypt, headed for Canaan. The country of Egypt is filled with vast temples and places of worship that can be viewed today, and date back to at least 3000 BC, more than 1,000 years before Israel was enslaved there. So the concept of a temple as a place of worship was widely known, but no mention is made of man worshiping the true God in such a building until humanity's sojourn on earth was half over. That's a concept I cannot get my head around. Israel's first temple lasted about 40 years until they entered Canaan. Their first permanent temple structure, Solomon's temple, lasted from 957 to 586 BC, some 371 years. The second temple stood from 515 BC to 70 AD, some 575 years. But then the real building started. The first proper Christian church ever built is found in the country of North Jordan. Built in 230 AD, St. George's Church in Rehab, Jordan was found in 2008. It was a secret underground church which may have sheltered the disciples of Christ. Another claim to the earliest Christian church is made by Kara Kalisa in northwest Iran. Tradition holds that the disciple Thaddeus was martyred here, and the first church was built on the site in 68 AD. Regardless of who was first, Christ himself worshipped in the synagogues of the time. Today it is estimated that 16 million Christian churches exist worldwide, serving 2.5 billion Christians. In the United States alone, there are 400,000 Christian churches serving 200 million Christians, the largest Christian population in the world. Maybe God planned this all out to accomplish his goal found in Matthew 24:14. I someday want to ask him. I'm sure we all have many questions to ask him. Prophet Haggai wrote the 37th book of our Bible and is number 10 on the minor prophet list. He is the first of only 3 post-exile prophets, that is, those that lived after the Jews returned from Persia in 539 BC. He begins his book by stating the exact date of his writing of his prophecy. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the 1st day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judea, and to Joshua the son of Josedek the high priest, saying, Haggai 1:1. This text places the date of his prophecy at 520 BC. Once the Jews returned from their exile, one of their first orders of business was rebuilding the temple, now a pile of rubble. The work was started, but according to Haggai, Zechariah, and Ezra, the work was stopped. King Cyrus of Medo-Persia decreed in 539 BC that the temple was to be rebuilt, but the Samaritans, Jews remaining in the northern kingdom, wanted to assist the returning exiles. However, the exiles wanted to rebuild it all by themselves. This, of course, led to much discussion and discord. The Samaritans contacted King Cyrus's personnel, and the work was halted. Cyrus finally died in 530 BC, and after more wrangling, the new king, Darius I, approved the rebuilding of the temple. Haggai and his contemporary prophet, through God's urging, pushed the then governor to resume work, and by 516 BC, the new temple was consecrated. Haggai's book speaks to his urgings by God and his own urgings to the Jewish leaders to begin rebuilding. His book relates the beautiful language God used to push him to prophesy to the still weary and disorganized Jewish nation. Some 75,000 Jews lived in Judea before the exile, and likely half of them or more were exiled. It is likely 20,000 or so returned from exile, as the population of Jerusalem in Haggai's time has been estimated to be about 40,000. Therefore, building a massive new structure would have been a daunting task. Ezra 6:3 gives us Darius' plan of how the temple was to be built. And let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 60 cubits. This information translates to a building 90 feet tall and 90 feet wide, a massive structure, undoubtedly not matching anything in the old city at the time. All this likely did not happen, but by 516 AD, 4 years after Haggai's prophecy, some sort of structure stood on the site where Solomon's temple had stood. It was not until the Idumean King Herod the Great became king of Judea that things got rolling. He began refurbishing the temple in 20 BC, a task that lasted 46 years, the time when Christ began his ministry. The temple now stood 150 feet tall and was faced with white stone. It is estimated that King Herod's workforce was 10,000 men, including 1,500 priests, who were the only ones allowed to work on the holy parts of the temple. God's patience is beyond human comprehension, and his use of available humanity even more so. After waiting 19 years, he finally gets a couple of locals, Haggai and Zechariah, to kickstart his work. Then, some 500 years later, he finally finds someone else willing to work. But it's not some prophet or even a Jew. It's an immoral king who doesn't even believe in him. And it is the one who will play a big part in killing God. The irony and the beauty of it all is that King Herod will become an unwilling, yet integral part in carrying out God's most marvelous plan, his plan of salvation. Two texts stand out in Haggai's little 2-chapter book. The first is Haggai 1:8. Go up to the mountain and bring wood and build a house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith the Lord. God tells Israel through his prophet to build him a house, and he, the God of the universe, will glorify it. I think this is what a temple is all about. It's not the building, however humble or glorious, but it is that God is there to meet, minister, inspire, and to reassure that he is always with us and will be with us to the very day that his plan of salvation culminates with his return, his elimination of evil, and his building us a brand new earth. Haggai, whose name means my holidays, puts a further stamp on his prophecy. And I will shake all the nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. Haggai 2:7. Sound familiar? George Frederick Handel liked those words. So should we. In fact, God did come to Haggai's temple. Christ marched into the great temple in Jerusalem in 30 A.D., forever glorifying it. He then marched up the steepest hill in the universe to save each and every human being for eternity. There is no more glorious act in the history of the universe. Take time to read through Haggai's book. It will only take you 10 minutes, but spend a minute or two contemplating the prophet's words, rather God's words, in Haggai 1:8 and 2:7. It will be the best 2-minute drill of your life. After Haggai's friend left for supper, Haggai started scrounging around for something to eat himself. He knew he had some cheese someplace, but he couldn't immediately find it. He pulled a loaf of challah, Hebrew flatbread, out of the cupboard, and then hunted further for his cheese. He finally looked behind the cookie jar, and there he found the paper the cheese had been in, but the cheese was gone. He then saw the telltale sign of a mouse who had no doubt consumed his cheese. Haggai's cat had run away the week before and not returned. His dog was of no help in policing his house against burglars or rodents. Haggai then went back in the cupboard and found a small dish of butter. "Well, looks like butter bread tonight, Charlie," he said to his yellow mongrel dog. "We will both eventually die in this diet." Wish my wife was still alive. A tear came to his eye, and then a few more. His wife had not survived the Persian captivity, plague or something they called it, and he had not found any suitable new wife, girlfriend, or even maid in this Jerusalem, now a God-forsaken town. He buttered up a slice of challah and handed it to Charlie. "Here, boy, enjoy some bread from your master's table." As he started to butter a slice for himself, he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he called out. In walked the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on, and she was carrying a large basket of food, bread, fruit, fish, cheese, even cookies. He almost fell off his chair. "Supper time, Haggai. Put that bread away. I'm going to cook you the best supper you've ever had." The woman proceeded to take her basket to the kitchen and began cooking him fish and vegetables and rice. The aroma overwhelmed the now speechless Haggai. He watched her cook, but could not mouth even a hello. She turned and smiled at him occasionally and uttered a few niceties. After about 15 minutes, she heaped the food on a huge plate which she had brought and set it before him. "Supper is served," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "Why, now you just eat, Haggai. You're going to need your strength." He didn't know what that meant, but he hoped he did. He dug in. He had never, ever tasted such wonderful food. The spices were perfect. The flavors were, well, out of this world. "You better have some," he finally said as he chewed on some fish. "Oh, I already ate, but you enjoy," she said, staring at him. He soon was getting full and began staring at a tray of desserts on the table. They included rugulash, his favorite. "I'm getting full. This is marvelous food," he said. "You must eat it all. Didn't your mother tell you that?" she said. He nodded. "I'll try, but I'd like to save some room for a dessert." He pointed at the dessert tray. "Just keep eating. There'll be plenty of room." He struggled to get the last bite of fish down, but did so. "Okay, good. Now pick out some desserts." Before he could do so, she put one of each kind of dessert on a fresh plate and set it before him. "I can't eat all that," he said as he picked up the rugulash. "Oh, yes, you can," she said. "You're a growing boy." "I soon will be with all this wonderful food," he said, rubbing his stomach. To his surprise, as he ate the rugulash, his hunger returned, and soon he had eaten every one of the 6 or so desserts on the plate. He stared at his new friend. "What is your name?" he said. "Arya," she said, standing and taking his plate to the counter. "Where from?" he said. She ignored his question and said, "I have brought you supper and some very important information," she said. Enamored, he ignored her answer and said, "Arya was my wife's name." "I know," she said. This answer he did not ignore. "How did you know? I don't believe we've ever met," he said. "I knew her, your wife." "You did? Where?" "Oh, I met her in Persia." This Arya was determined to cover up her own identity, and Haggai was now just as determined to uncover it. "Well, I must go," she said. "Can't you stay a while? I'm kind of lonely here, and you've really helped the food and all," he said. "Goodbye, Haggai. You have a nice rest of your evening." She kissed him on the other cheek and went out the front door. He stared after her for a long time. He noticed she had left the basket and many leftovers, including a bunch of desserts. He eventually began to dawn on him that this woman, this Arya, might not just be a woman. He then realized that he had not offered a prayer for his food before he ate. That was a definite sin, according to the rabbi. He decided he better do so, hoping the rabbi would forgive him, and thus God would also forgive him. He folded his hands and began, "Dear God, thank you so much for the wonderful food and the nice woman you brought. Please bless it and nourish my body." "A little late for that," a voice said from across the table. Haggai had jumped a foot, opened his eyes, and stared across the table at a short man in a blue cloak. I couldn't get any words out. "You know, Haggai, you have got pretty much everything a man could want. A nice house, a nice dog, good friends, good health, a good job, even a rather warm winter." Haggai nodded at the man and continued to stare, but could not muster a response. "Tonight you had the best dinner of your life with the most beautiful companion of your life, and all you could say was, 'Thanks?' But, sir, she left before. You know, you got it all, and yet you do nothing. But, sir, no, no me, I've got nothing, yet I do everything." The lights were slowly turning on in Haggai's brain. "Sir, I lost my wife. Don't worry, another will come along. What should I do?" His comment seemed to anger the man. He stood up and glared at Haggai. "You know, people hate me around here. They yell at me, swear at me, cheat me, lie to me, steal my stuff. You're included in that." The man's face was as red as an apple laying on the table. "I'm sorry, sir, if I've wronged you. Let me make it up." "You can't. What's done is done. You can't change the past. But you can change the future." "How, sir? Tell me how," Haggai said. "You know, I don't even have a place to stay," the man said, sitting back down. "Well, you can stay here tonight. In fact, you can stay as long as you wish," Haggai said, now more pleased with himself. "I don't wish. I need my own house." Before Haggai could answer, the man jumped up and stormed out the front door. "Who does this guy think he is, barging into my home and asking for a handout?" His face now turned red with some anger of his own. He determined to find out who this little man in the blue cloak was and report him to the authorities. The nerve of some people. I'm sure he was a Union guy, some Samaritan or maybe some Edomite. I'll go to the constable tomorrow. Maybe they will know of him. A real shyster. Sure, a lot of them since we got back from Persia. His face cooled and he reached for another rougouche. He bit into it, but it tasted awful. Must have been a bad one. He gave it to Charlie, who scarfed it down. Then he took another. Took a bite, but that one was also bad. He gave this one to Charlie also, who scarfed it down as well. Picked him another, but as he did so he stared at the morning paper laying on the table. He had not got around to reading it with all the company and the commotion. 2 decades and still no temple, the front page headline read. He dropped the rougouche on the floor to Charlie's delight. He could not take his eyes off that headline. He read it and reread it. His skin now began to tingle and soon turned cold as ice. His hands now began to tremble. He slowly realized what had happened this evening, and it scared him to death. He tried to slide off his chair to kneel down on the floor, but he couldn't move. He folded his shaking hands as best he could, and continued to stare at that newspaper. Dear God, he finally said, forgive me. Forgive me for not recognizing you and your wonderful servant this evening. Please again forgive me. I will go straight away to your temple, your shabby tent tomorrow. I will speak to the rabbi and the governor. I will not rest until we build you a new temple, a temple fitting for you to live in and for us to worship you. Forgive me again, and thank you for the wonderful evening and for hearing my prayer. This is your humble and penitent servant, Haggai. Amen.